Yeah, so welcome everyone. I'll be talking about the applications impacts of the BrAPI project, and of course, where I'd like to start for anyone who's not familiar, what is BrAPI? What is the breeding API, also known as BrAPI? And so to answer this, I've broken it down a little bit. BrAPI is a standardized RESTful web service API specification for communicating plant breeding data. Some of you may be familiar with some of these terms, but I'll dig into them a little bit more just so we're all on the same page. So an API. We are all familiar with user interfaces. So that's a UI where a person is interacting with a piece of software, adding data, consuming data, triggering different processes. An API is exactly the same thing. It's just from one piece of software to another. So this is sort of automating the control of one piece of software from another piece of software. And there's a whole range of different types of APIs. Specifically, when we're talking about BrAPI, we're talking about web services. So a web service, as the name suggests, is a service that is available over the web, over some network. Typically, for most web services, you'll have this sort of structure. And the details of this aren't so important, but there's always some sort of request to the service provider and some response back from that service provider. So in this case, where the service is just providing some addition function, but the request is made, sent over some network to the service provider. The service provider is going to act on that in some way and send a response back. And this loop is important to understand. There's always that request response loop traveling over some network. So there are a few different types of web services as well as a few different flavors. And specifically, we're talking about RESTful web services. So REST stands for representational state transfer. The name is not so important, but REST is architectural design for web services based on the HTTP standards. So everything we know and love about browsing the internet, it's all based on the HTTP standards, and REST is built right on top of that as well. Instead of passing web pages back and forth, which are designed for people and users to consume, we'll be passing JSON data back and forth, JSON objects back and forth, which is much easier for software and computers to consume. So this is sort of the critical part about understanding BrAPI, and I try to work this into every presentation I give. BrAPI is a standardized specification. So first, it's a defined set of standardized data models for communicating all the information around plant breeding that you would need. And most importantly to understand is BrAPI is a technical specification. At its core, BrAPI is a set of documentation that defines these standards without an implementation. There's some misconception sometimes in that there's some piece of software that I could hand you and say, this is BrAPI. That's not the case. At its core, BrAPI is just the specification documents that define the standard. And it's up to everyone else to create or implement that standard within their own software. That said, there are many community implementations of the standard already, generic implementations that can be added to existing software, in a variety of different languages. So there are packages available that I can hand you and say this is a BrAPI implementation, but at its core, BrAPI is just that specification that defines everything. And here it is. So this is a really high-level domain map of all the objects that are available within the BrAPI specification. It's broken up into these 4 modules, mostly for convenience. They all are, as you can see, they're all interconnected. They all, they're all the same thing. They all work together, but the specification was getting large enough that in version 2 of the project, we divided it into these 4 modules just for ease of finding different elements of the spec and being able to search through it quickly. So in the BrAPI core module, this is everything to do with sort of program and trial management, and some other sort of core things that you just need in all aspects of breeding trials. In the BrAPI germplasm module, this is everything to do with germplasm or accessions, pedigrees, crosses, all of that type of data and metadata can be represented there. BrAPI genotyping, pretty straightforward, is everything to do with genotyping, genotyping results, samples, reference sets, that sort of thing. And finally, BrAPI phenotyping is everything to do with basic phenotyping. Your observation units, that's sort of the generic term, the generic BrAPI term for your plot or your plant or your pot or whatever. We made it generic, so whatever you are observing is your observation unit, and then that connects to your variables, your traits, and that connects to your observations. That's the actual phenotypic data being observed. So yeah, these are all necessary for your typical plant breeding project and database. So this is everything that BrAPI can cover. I won't be digging into each one of these during this webinar. If you're curious about the specification, there will be a link to the actual specification documents at the end. You can dig into each one of these objects and see sort of the details of the metadata available in each one. So high level, how does BrAPI work? So this is sort of a typical request response loop for BrAPI. It may not always look like this. There are different variations, different use cases you can do, but this is sort of a pretty typical one. You've got a client application, you assume that's a web page or tool of some kind, and you've got a server application that's some database of some kind holding some amount of observation data. And so the different layers here of the different applications are pretty typical what you would see for these types of applications. So the user interface where the user is interacting, that's going to be talking in some language that that user understands. The controller is going to be doing the business logic for whatever the user's requests are. And then the request builder and the response handler here, they're going to be responsible for translating whatever the data looks like in the controller, whatever the business logic data looks like, translating that into the BrAPI specification format and sending that request over to the server application. The server application is going to accept that request in the BrAPI format, and then it's also going to perform its own mapping, so it can understand, basically what the request coming in mapped into its own data model, whatever that is. So it can make a request to the database, hopefully get some sort of response back out of the database. It's going to map that response back onto the BrAPI format, and send the response back over in the BrAPI format for the client application to handle. And then again, in reverse, the response handler is going to take the BrAPI format, turn it back into whatever the user is used to, whatever the controller of the application is, whatever the format they're dealing with, and present that back to the user. So this idea of mapping, typically when you're setting up a BrAPI implementation, actually building the API part, the technical part of building the API is pretty straightforward. The piece that I've seen takes the longest for most groups to build is this mapping piece of mapping from their proprietary data models to the BrAPI format. But once you've figured out sort of what that mapping is and you've written it in code, you only have to do that once, and then every request from then on is speaking the same language. So leading into that nicely, so why do we need BrAPI? What's the point? Why are we doing this? And so the name of the game here is interoperability, and that's what we're looking for, is interoperability between these different systems and tools within the plant breeding community. And when we look at interoperability, I have a little cartoon here. You can talk about interoperability in terms of sort of manual interoperability. If you imagine these are two different applications, and you've got a user on application 1 who extracts some data into a file format of some kind, usually in Excel or TSV or whatever, manually sends that over to a second application that knows how to import that data. I would consider these two applications interoperable. You can move data between them freely, and they'll function on some sort of similar formatted data. The issue here is it's slow and it's messy. I'm sure we've all had to deal with something like this at some point, trying to get data out of one system manually into another system. This sort of step in the middle with the user and the Excel file. A lot of times you're going to have some manual edits to that data file, some smudging of data to make it fit the correct format, whatever might need to happen to it. And the other thing you've got here is now you've got two copies of the same data. Now copied, well, three copies. You've got the copy in application 1, you've got the Excel file floating around there somewhere, and you've got the copy in application 2, the database there. So you know, these copies can now get out of sync or changed in various ways, and it takes a lot of effort to try and maintain this and figure out everything that's going on. So what we want to try and do is take that picture, automate it, and standardize it. So first, we'll automate it with an API, and this doesn't have to be BrAPI. This could be any API, but you know, we'll set up an API layer in application 1 so that other applications can access that data directly. And now, you know, we've gotten rid of 2 users here, two potential sources of error. And now in this picture, the user of application 2 can call up the data that they need from application 1 without having to transfer anything, without having to do any manual edits to the data. It's coming automatically across the wire, and we've got several different options here as well. There's a lot of flexibility in this. The user in application 2 might just be viewing that data. They don't need to store a copy of it. They might want to review it and then store it. They might want to store it automatically into their own database and then look at it. You know, there's lots of different use cases that could be here, depending on how you wanted to set it up, and it can all happen automatically and repeatedly. So, you know, if we wanted to automate some data going from the first application to the second application and store it in the database, now we can also automate that process. So every day it gets updated. So now the 2 databases are in sync for that data. Now, as I said, that doesn't have to require BrAPI. That would be possible with any API, and you know, any automated data transfer would give you that sort of flexibility and functionality. To stack on top of that, BrAPI offers that data standards. You know, we offer the standardization so that now, instead of just an API between these 2 applications that can be automated, now we can trade out different applications if we wanted to. And because everyone is still talking in the same language, they're still using that same BrAPI standard, the procedures should, in theory, still flow just the same as they were. We can even transfer this out for a different type of application. So now we've got some sort of data warehouse here that we're pulling data out of, but the user doesn't even necessarily need to know that it's a different type of application or that it's a different source, because it's all speaking the same language, and they're just viewing it in the UI that they're used to, without having to muck around and trying to find where that data exists. So the API gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of the different use cases we can solve, and adding the standardization on top of that means we have a lot more flexibility in terms of the reach and the number of different applications we can connect with. Okay, I have mentioned the community a couple of times here. So who is the BrAPI community? Is a good question. So right now, the BrAPI community has about 37 registered partner organizations, and that's growing each year. We get more added to the list. It's tough to know exactly how wide an impact BrAPI is having, in terms of users, daily usage. Just there's such a variety of different implementations and people doing different things. What I can give is sort of a lower bound. We have about 250 people on the BrAPI mailing list who receive updates about the community from me. And so, these are plant breeders, software developers, data managers, other experts in various fields that make up this community, and they are all supporting their own set of users in different applications and systems around the world. And in terms of leadership, besides myself, I'm the project coordinator. I'm sort of the primary day-to-day guy for the BrAPI project, but we also have 6 elected members of the community on an advisory board, and they meet quarterly to sort of manage the long-term goals of the project, sort of the direction in general, these are members of the community who have been involved in the BrAPI project already, and they're elected by the community to represent the community in the leadership of the project, to make sure that we have the best interests of everyone as we move forward in the project. And we are an international community. I like showing off this map. It's not super precise, but I do like showing off sort of where all the different organizations that we're partnered with so far are located. If you or your organization is interested in joining, there's information on the website. It's really easy to become a registered partner organization. You send me an email with your company logo, and I put you on the list. It's just that easy. Just sort of the impact of the BrAPI project so far. I think it's really exciting to see all these different groups coming together, and maybe not all of them are sharing all of their data with everyone, but they're all using the common standard to interact with some groups. So one of the most important parts of this community, and I think one of the things that really built up the BrAPI community over the past few years is the BrAPI hackathons. So these are events that I'll run and organize. Since the pandemic, schedules changed a little bit. We now have a hackathon every 6 months, roughly, one in person and one virtual. The hackathons are an opportunity for members of the community to come together and write code together, develop implementations of BrAPI, connect their different systems, and interact with the rest of the community, and really get to know each other, build some working relationships. I've seen a really big positive impact from this, and all the different folks who have joined these hackathons in the past, being able to reconnect with each other after the hackathon and keep going with different projects. This was our most recent hackathon. I just got back from in the end of March. We were in Greenville, South Carolina, and so it was a little bit smaller of an event, as you can see from the pictures, but still a good group. We got together and yeah, it was really, really nice to see everyone again and get back into that atmosphere, sort of post-pandemic, being able to reconnect with folks. Okay. Yeah, so as promised, sort of we've covered a little bit about sort of what is BrAPI, why do we need it, and who's in the community. I did want to sort of touch on the different applications and impacts for BrAPI as the title of this webinar suggested. I'm not going to be able to cover everything, obviously. We have a list of BrAPI compatible software on the website. This is some of those applications. There are more, and there are more being developed right now that aren't on the website. And and one of the most exciting things for me is it's happened a number of times now where someone will reach out to me, send me an email out of the blue and say, hey, we've been developing our BrAPI implementation for the past year now, and we had some questions for you. And I'll say, that's great. Who are you and why have I never heard of you before? So just sort of having people who find the website, find the standard, whatever, however they get there, and develop their own implementation for their own tools without my knowledge. It's great, but I can't advertise your tool if I don't know about it. So yeah, these are some of the applications and tools that I know about. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of them, unfortunately, but yeah, go to the website and check out the full list. I am going to touch on a few of sort of the solved use cases I'm pretty excited about. When this project started, so BrAPI project started in well, it initially started in 2015. I joined the project in 2017, and around that time, we were working under the Excellence in Breeding CGIAR funding, and we had a sort of a list of goals, a list of use cases we wanted to make sure we could tackle and represent with the BrAPI standard. And I'm happy to say that all of those initial goals have been met. Yeah, and so we're very excited to be able to show off that those, we reached those goals, and now we're looking ahead to the future and seeing what else we can do with the BrAPI projects. But yeah, so first, the solved use cases here. So many of you may be familiar with the mobile app, the KSU Fieldbook. I spent a bunch of time with the KSU guys developing an implementation of BrAPI within KSU Fieldbook. And so now that's fully functional and in production for them. Within the Fieldbook app, you can connect to any BrAPI compatible database and pull down from that database. You can pull down your plots and your traits and any, all the other metadata that Fieldbook might need. And when you're done observing, making your observations in the field, you can push all those observations and images back up to the database. So that we've got that working within the app and connected with a number of the sort of common breeding databases already. So that's well into production already. and again, you know, KSU has and still has the ability to import data via a CSV file and translate sort of translate data back and forth like that. But this keeps it all within the app. No file transfers necessary. It sort of streamlines the whole process, makes it a lot faster and easier to pull data and push data back. One of the other use cases we were looking at and have developed a solution for is being able to send sample data, manage sample data between whatever system is managing the samples, taking in the samples, passing that sample data to a genotyping lab, and then passing all the sample data to a genotype database of some kind, just so all the sample data and all that metadata can travel with the physical samples and make sure it's all consistent between the potential three different systems. And yeah, this has been set up and tested. Not used so much in production yet, but there's still some work being done on this use case for the various groups that are implementing it. And again, it simplifies the whole process without the need for transferring files manually. The last piece here, the next use case here is pretty generic in terms of just pulling data, whatever you need to do some sort of analysis or decision making in the breeding cycle. There are a couple of different tools in development that fit this model. I'll call out the QBMS tool is probably the most advanced in terms of this use case, but there's a few others under development right now. And yeah, and basically just the ability to, with QBMS in particular, I use that as an example. It's a R package that people can use, and it's designed in such a way that it's going to be familiar to the breeders and the data scientists that are used to working in R. But in the background, it automatically can connect to a phenotypic database and a genotypic database and pull whatever data you're interested in from those databases automatically in the background, and you've just got that data available within your R within your R instance to play with and analyze as you need. So that's very cool. There's a few other tools that are along the same lines. Mr. Bean's one people might be familiar with is also set up to be BrAPI compatible. That's also along the same lines. So very excited about this. And sort of with these three, I picked these three because they're sort of there's sort of three examples, use cases that you can do with BrAPI that are already solved with BrAPI, and they also sort of represent a full range of sort of breeding cycle, breeding management. So, collecting your data from the field, doing some genotyping with some samples, and then doing some analysis and decision making with that data. Is sort of a full cycle of most breeding trials. The last use case or piece that I have here is sort of interesting. So Lucas Mueller, one of the sort of founding members of the BrAPI spec and the BrAPI community, came running into my office one day and said, "We need BRAPs," and then ran away again. And it was only a couple days later that I caught up to him and said, "What are you talking about, Lucas?" And so the idea that we hatched together and has sort of taken off since then, is this idea of BrAPI applications, or BRAPs, and these are little web tools, visualizations, decision makers, whatever. There's a few different types, but the key piece is that they're little JSON web tools, single page applications that can be moved from system to system pretty easily, and they entirely rely on BrAPI data to run them. So as long as you have a BrAPI compatible data server, you can take any one of these little applications, add it to your own website, and it should just work with your data. And this was a good example that I like sharing. Excuse me, because as these different data sets get bigger and bigger, one of the things we start to talk about, especially in the big data world, is instead of moving the data, you move the tools to where the data lives. And so this idea around BRAPs is to have all these little tools that can function on the BrAPI API. So instead of transferring huge amounts of data from one system to another, you can just move the tool that you're interested in to where the data lives and run it directly against the data where it lives. And just another way of being able to share within the community. Instead of sharing data, we're sharing tools. Okay, and I think that will just about wrap it up for me. I have all the different resources you might be interested in here. Particularly, I'll call out at the bottom, we have a contact page on the website. If you have any other follow-up questions or anything that we didn't get to today, or you're interested in joining the community, whatever, go to that contact page. You can reach out to me. You can join the mailing list, and yeah, I'll be happy to take it from there. So we'll finish up there. Are there any questions, AJ?
So the first question is, I'm not sure if it's a complete question, is data transfer application independent?
Yeah, if I'm reading this correctly, is data transfer application independent? And so I think, yes, yeah. So the idea of using REST and setting up as just the specification is it's totally language independent. It'll work with any programming language, as long as that programming language has access to the internet and has access to your basic HTTP calls, which everyone does at this point, I think. Then yeah, it should be able to it should be accessible and able to be implemented in any kind of application.
Right. So next question: can BrAPI support LIMS software like Nautilus from Thermo Fisher? So I think the main question is: do we have to create a new standardized architecture for every application that are connected?
So yes and no. The idea is BrAPI is an API layer that sits on top of an application. So to have something that's BrAPI compatible, then yes, you do need to build a layer on top of an existing application. Now, that may not be a whole new thing. Like I said, there are plenty of packages within the community that people have built in a number of different languages. So you've got a Java package, you've got a Python package. There's a number of them out there. So you don't have to build everything from scratch, but there is sort of this still the mapping from your internal proprietary data structures into the BrAPI compatible format. That's to make things compatible. That said, this is what I said right in the beginning is you still get a lot of the features just by using an API. And so what we've seen in some cases where you've got a piece of software that's maybe proprietary and they don't have any interest in implementing BrAPI on top of it. I've seen people build other tools that sort of interact. So taking Nautilus as an example, you build a tool that interacts with Nautilus using their existing APIs, and then sort of building your own BrAPI compatible layer on top of that to be sort of the transfer. It's not as efficient, but it means you get the data into the BrAPI specific format so that others can use it. So there's lots of ways of lots of different flexibility of ways of implementing things to get the data you're interested in a BrAPI compatible format.
Okay. Is there any detailed manual to use this database or BrAPI?
Yeah. So on the website, I'll jump back in the slides here for a second. So this first one, the brappy.org/specification, that has all the details on the specification and sort of all the details of how to implement it. There's several supplementary things in the read the docs, and I have a whole getting started with BrAPI webpage on the website. So I encourage you to check out the website. There's a lot of information on there. If you still have any questions after that, feel free to contact me. This is my full-time job, is managing this project. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to meet and walk you through it. One of the things you touched on that I'll just mention briefly, talking about using BrAPI as a database. It is just an API. Right now, it's designed to be an API, but there are groups within the community who have taken that a step further and are trying to use the BrAPI data models directly as a database. So there is no translation layer needed. They've already got the BrAPI compatible data within their database, and then it's just exposing that to the world. So yeah, I hope that answered that question.
Thanks. Your pictures had Green Global as one of the partners. How is it used within Green Global?
So that's, yeah, and then a follow-up question there.
Yeah. And how do international users of Green Global, international gene banks using Green Global software for their own database, use BrAPI to transfer between different systems?
So these are some good questions. So right now, I believe the implementation in Green Global just allows people to pull germplasm metadata out of the out of the Green Global Database. I was recently in a talk with a conversation with some of the Green Global folks about sort of the next steps and what we can do to take it a step further. And so yeah, we right now I think it's just pulling data stored within the Green Global Database out and sort of read only. But we have talked about what it might look like to have synchronization between different gene bank databases and sort of where we can go from there, different standardized ordering systems and things like that. So we have been having those talks, but it's not quite there yet in implementation. So keep an eye out for it.
So what to do if data types to be exchanged are not described in the current BrAPI model? Can the BrAPI data model evolve?
I'm so glad you asked this question because it was something I forgot to mention in the presentation. Yes, so the BrAPI data model is evolving. We're on version 2.1 right now. But yeah, as people use it, as people discover different use cases that aren't covered by, by the existing specification, we have a whole GitHub issues board. I encourage everyone to, if you find an issue that something's not covered or you have an idea for an enhancement, whatever, post an issue in that issues board, and I'll regularly will sort through those issues and implement new versions of the specification. Recently, we've been slowing down a little bit, so people have been sort of satisfied with the existing standard, but we're still progressing and new versions as we get a decent collection of issues to release a new version. We don't want to release versions too quickly because then it's not really standard, but we also still see the need for constantly upgrading the standard. And on top of that, I will just add, well, two things. First of all, I'm a software engineer first, so what I always say to people is, if the BrAPI standard as written doesn't quite work for you, it's missing some piece of data, whatever, implement it in such a way that it does work and tell me about the issue. I want to see working software first, and then we'll make the standard catch up to whatever the problem is. Don't want to hold strictly to the standard just because it is a standard. We want to get working software out there first. And the second piece is sort of along those same lines. Every single BrAPI object has a section in it called additional info, where you can put whatever you want. It's free range. So if the BrAPI standard is missing something that missing some piece of data that's really important to you or your use case or whatever you're working on, it has space within the specification to say, dump whatever you need to in here. And then again, tell me about the issue and we can try and fix it going forward.
Great. So this is the last question that we have. Do we need to implement a synchronization of our database with BrAPI?
I think that's a question for you and what you're trying to accomplish. Certainly, you can, if you have two different systems that are both BrAPI compatible and they're holding the same data, then you can set those up to be automatically synchronized with each other. I know there are some systems out there. One of the ones I had on my slide was called FEDER. That's a sort of generalized search engine for plant breeding research data. and it uses BrAPI. It has a synchronization method. I think it synchronizes once a week, something like that, where all the different databases it's connected to, it reaches out to those and makes sure that all the search index metadata it has is up to date with all those. So, we've definitely got examples within the community of setting up some sort of synchronization between two systems. But that's, do you need to? That's a question for you and your database and whatever use case you're interested in.